Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Lonely Liberal Podcast. I am your host, Nick Zankin, and I'm so happy to have you on this lovely Thursday afternoon. Sorry for the delay, but life. But we got a great show for you today. We're going to be talking about what the hell is going on in Minnesota. I mean, my God, a state that maybe not a lot of you have been thinking about through the course of your life, unless you're from Minnesota. Hello, Minnesotans. Love to have you. But my God, what the drama they've had, from fraud claims to the ICE drama to now Trump tonight saying he's going to maybe do the Insurrection Act on Minnesota and send the National Guard there. So much to talk about, and I just wanted to break down these three things so you can kind of have a good, wrap around of what the heck is going on in Minnesota. So, like I said, we've got a lot to talk about. So, without further ado, let's get to it. All right, so let's start with the fraud saga, because that's almost kind of being used as a precipice for all of the other kind of immigration drama that we've seen, and it really is a multi-year saga. So saga isn't being used ridiculously. I do think it gets the saga label. So it all kind of circles around this organization called Feeding Our Future. So what that is a federal child nourishment program, so giving food to kids. And what happened was, according to the DOJ, was there was this giant fraud scheme that really happened around COVID in the pandemic, and basically they were committing fraud, right? The DOJ says it's around $250 million worth of fraud. There's been 47 defendants who have been charged. Most of this actually happened in 2022. So the original charging of these people happened in 2022, but in 2025, there was a giant milestone as there was a big trial, right? So when this happened, they were finally convicted, and the big $250 million scheme kind of label hit the headlines, right? So for a quick timeline, you had from 2019 to 2021, the DOJ says Feeding Our Future went from a $3.5 million in federal funds group to around $200 million in 2021. So big jump. 2022, there was 47 defendants charged. In 2025, they were convicted. And basically, as the year has gone on, or I guess as 2025 went on, Jesus Christ, it's already 2026, things are just getting seized locally, right? Drama, you've seen indictments, stuff like that. And so one thing you may have noticed as I described that, I haven't mentioned Somalians, right? Or Somali Americans, right? And this has been a huge part of Trump's rhetoric, right? That this is some sort of Somalian ring or whatever like that. And you've seen this basically been catnip for politicians. So what's the deal with this? Basically, according to all the major reporting outlines, that Minnesota has a big Somali community, right? And in that community, a lot of the children of those communities were receiving benefits, right? Now, what this has done is blown crazy out of proportion, per usual from the Trump administration, but that's what it is. So it's basically a loose tying between the fact that some of the people charged in this fraud ecosystem are Somali American. That's true. But that became basically an immoral jump from, there's a huge Somali American problem in this country, blah, 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 horrible stuff like that. So the truth is, there were people charged who were Somali Americans in Minnesota for fraud. There are lots of Somalian Americans all throughout the country in Minnesota, totally fine, okay? The actual problem here was that there was this very, very weak controls, COVID money mess that happened into a organization that figured out how to basically exploit a reimbursement system, and it effectively now has turned into a community smear attack. Okay, so to recap, what you've seen is a massive fraud from a kind of charity, quote-unquote, group in Minnesota. Now there's drama. So the last kind of leg of this story is that they were trying to cut federal aid, right, SNAP benefits, stuff like that. A federal judge then blocked this cutting, so they were trying to cut $80 million in SNAP funding. That got blocked. So there we go. There's been, again, more probes and stuff about seeing if anyone was trying to send money overseas, stuff like that. That's still TBD, but this is, again, the basic summary of it all. So hope that makes sense. that's why that basically was a news storyline. And rightfully so, right? It really is interesting. Of course, though, it just got ballooned out of proportion to turn out to a hateful kind of commentary. And why that's so important is because it ties to part 2 of this saga, which is basically the question, why is Minnesota getting so much ICE attention, right? Some of you, at least I definitely thought, why is this northern state that basically is pretty uncontroversial most of the time, lovely state, why is all of a sudden it becoming like a hot spot for ICE raids and stuff like that? And a lot of that came from this Somali American rhetoric that stemmed out of this fraud scandal, okay? So basically, a big way that the DHS has defended this surge is this. They've said, look, the Somali community is committing fraud. We need to crack down, blah, 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 blah. And Minnesota sued back. Tim Walz was there. All of a sudden, this stuff started becoming very political. And I would say it was a political spectacle, retaliation, pressure campaign kind of thing. That's what the ACLU did when they sued them for racial profiling. And basically what it has is it's turned Minnesota into a stage for the Trump administration, right? They've got a big city, they have a visible immigrant community, and now they're involved in this very, hot button political topic. And so what this led to, and I didn't even know it had a name until doing research for this episode, is what ICE is calling Operation Metro Surge, which has involved over 2,000 federal agents and over 2,500 arrests since late November. That's from the AP. Reuters is saying 3,000 plus. And then after what we'll get to, the shooting of Renee Good, they're threatening even more, right? So at the very minimum, there's thousands of federal ICE agents roaming Minnesota. And anyone who's seen these, they put masks on. They're not IDing themselves. It's pretty drama. And so they were doing this since November, arresting, they said, thousands of different people. And unfortunately now, because of all the things that have been happening, it's, how do you know what they were doing, if these arrests are justified and all that stuff? And of course, right, this all came to kind of a head last week. Last week. I'm just making sure my weeks are lined up. When an ICE agent obviously fatally shot Renee Good on Jan 7th. They also wounded another person like 2 days ago, and so they're not calming down really. And this has been big drama. Obviously, a massive tragedy. Not only is just general police brutality awful. It's an ICE agent. This is an American citizen. Why are they attacking Americans? This is just so unbelievably creepy. Obviously, if you've been following the news, you also saw how, J.D. Vance, Trump, all these guys have kind of responded to thanking the officer who shot Renee Good, being really not just sympathetic, but defending him, saying, J.D. Vance saying that we owe the ICE officer a debt of gratitude, crazy stuff like that. And yeah, so this has made major protests, of course, and they're happening now, right? They're happening all week. I'm sure if you go on social media, you can look them up. People are freaking out, and allegedly so. ACLU, who I mentioned earlier, right? They do free speech lawsuits a lot of the time. They also cited the Renee Good incident as part of their kind of filing. It's an allegation, right? It's not saying it's definite. It's just filing kind of stuff. So it's claims, it's alleges, it's not definite, right? These are all kind of, in that kind of pending process. But, at the same time, we saw, and Renee Good has died. So that ain't alleged. That's true. And so as these protests have kind of picked up, we actually saw Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, request the National Guard last week because, that's the traditional mechanism for the National Guard is the governor requests them, usually for protests, riots, stuff like that. And he did. They're gone. Now, Trump, just tonight, has threatened to invoke the Insurrection Act to basically bring the National Guard in to Minnesota to quell the protests. Threatening the Insurrection Act is a big deal because what that basically does is it turns a protest into a quote-unquote rebellion. And it turns from policing a protest to like militarized power against American citizens. And that's big news. I mean, you may have heard about this, remember when California or any of these, like, DC, Chicago, we've been kind of hearing these rumblings of the Insurrection Act. The Insurrection Act actually has been used around 30 times, according to this Reuters report that I'm reading. So it has been used. I don't know, but I wonder to know what the context of it would be used, because this is a different can of worms, and we should treat it as a situation that is happening live. So there are kind of two things to keep in track on a legal point of view. There's this immigration surge legality, Minnesota, Illinois suing the federal government, and then you have the SNAP stuff kind of suing, right? But what we really should be watching, right, is does Metro Surge or whatever continue or get more? How do the courts end up going, like we just talked about? Like, does this become okay? Does it not? And the bigger one, and the one that I'm really curious about, is does fraud become a template for federal action elsewhere, right? Because the Department of Treasury has already started saying, Minnesota may be a model. Other states could have been doing the same thing. So I wouldn't be totally surprised if all of a sudden you start hearing the Trump administration use state-level fraud type drama, or state organizations that were committing fraud or pretending they committed fraud, who knows, as an excuse to, do what we're talking about, send ICE agents, cause protests, that feedback loop, and so forth. So here's the question, right? Minnesota's a stress test. Can the government fight real fraud without turning it into a collective punishment? And can it force an immigration law without sliding into a militarized police? Certainly doesn't look like it under the Trump administration. And that's our show, folks. Thank you so much for listening today. If you like the show, please give it a 5-star review wherever you listen. And better yet, listen, I didn't finish it. I'm just, I'm in selling mode. You gotta tell the show, But the truth is, if you could tell the show share the show, tell people about it, I'd really appreciate it. You'd be doing me a solid. But we'll be back on Sunday to talk about probably this and other news with Rick, like we do every Sunday. And yeah, my bad again for it being a day late. I know some of you reached out and said, where's the pod? Yeah, my bad. That won't happen in the future. But like I said, we'll be back on Sunday, and I appreciate you. Thanks. Bye.